pray that we would come before you now and gather together, Lord, in a way that honors you, Father, or that we would lay aside, Lord, other things at this time. And I pray for any wisdom here that we will read or discuss today, or that you may guide us in that, Father. We trust in your process and in your plan. Lord, I pray that we would each grow together, Lord, in your kingdom. Praise your name.
Amen. All right. What's new? You're being overworked or something? Look a little sober.
I guess it's just hard to answer that question sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we're just getting the wheels churning kind of for a new season for a lot of physical things and internal things that are going on. And that's a little rusty right now, I think, because I think it takes time to kind of get in the flow of a new schedule and a new way of thinking. I mean, even the weather is changing. All things which have kind of effect on your mind and your heart a little bit. But yeah, I guess we're just kind of winding down in some ways and winding up in others with school and work, and we're coming into a season of some of the feasts, some different things to have our minds on and our hearts prepared for.
Mm-hmm. What do you guys observe the Lord doing in your own lives, of course, but also outside of your own lives?
I think that that the Lord is, at least for myself, and I think I've heard some things that also other people have been dealing with that are similar, but with certain relationships, changing, and others, completely being, gone in a sense,
Mm-hmm.
and new ones being sown in, and I think the Lord is opening up a relational order that we are walking into, I guess. Just the way that we go about relationships. We have talked about that over the course of the last few years, I think, just about how significant people around us are, and I think there's another level being added onto that, what that means, what it means to be in the position and in the portion that you've been given, how to relate to one another. I think it's always, I don't want to say evolving, but progressing, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
when you're looking to progress. That's something that I was talking about with your dad the other day when we met, just about that relational order. I'm not too sure what that all entails, but just something I've been thinking about too. I I think it has a lot to do with understanding the positionings of people and understanding what kind of, like I was saying, like how to relate while understanding the position that somebody's been given and your relationship with them, or just in the context of the community.
Yeah.
But
Along those lines, do you have any further impressions on some things that were shared on Tuesday? I haven't had any further discussion with anyone else about it yet. But I know that was something that was asked for us to pray about and think a little bit more on. It's like some of the vision that Kim had, and maybe some further insight on things Nicole has shared as well. When you had mentioned, like I don't remember the word you used, like a reconsideration or realignment of relationships, that was reminding me of that, because there was some it seemed that there were some things revealed about the roles in which we are to play in this upcoming season. It would seem particularly for our community, but that's still a part of obviously the greater work that the Lord is doing in our midst and beyond it. So, sorry. Did you guys have any further impressions about that? I know each one of us were in the vision shared by Kim.
I think even it was also said, like, even though the vision has been given, there's still how to walk it out is still being revealed in a way. So the blueprint of what is happening and will happen has been given, but it's still takes part on our part to be ready to be instructed in how to walk that out.
Yeah.
Because it's still I was also talking to your dad about that. What he shared at the end there was pretty impactful to me, because he was also kind of sharing that same sentiment of not sure how to go on it yet, but obviously the Lord is actively speaking to our people and further too. So it's what to do with what's been given there. It's more of a posture still of wanting to receive in that way. I haven't heard anything specifically on like along that line, but yeah.
Some of the initial impressions I had took into account some things that were shared some weeks ago about the repository of teachings that we have archived over the last decade, and what work there may yet be in store for us to bring, not revive, I wouldn't say, but like rediscover for our people, and the way that even we go about like practically organizing that. Sorry. And disseminating it amongst our people and even to a wider audience. I don't know what's in store for that. But what made me think of that is the very beginning of the vision, where you see, I think it's John and I trying to recover some some kind of jewels or something, and eventually like a chest filled with objects that would be used to adorn a dining table or something like that. I see that there may be a lot of parallel there with the teaching that we have received, and I see a lot of crossover there with the last discussion point that Justin brought up about remembrance. I think there's significance there. But the way that connects with the rest of the vision is that aren't we given like staffs or walking sticks, that those jewels, I think they were like a blue color, were
Yeah, they have like
embedded
specific
into
things that
Yeah.
let them fit in.
And that's almost exactly what John was saying last worship night when he was talking about the safety deposit, and how the teachings basically are like a bunch of keys that we collect, and when the time comes in life to take one of those keys, then the Spirit of the Lord is always there with the other, and there's then access to something that that we need, like a grace, even not just a knowledge, but a grace and enablement needed for that time, for that moment, whatever it may be.
It's kind of like Dad was saying about how when Emmanuel used to, talk to him for such a long time, such intense periods of time, that maybe he wouldn't remember everything specifically, but God would kind of bring that out at the right time.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it is. And that when Dad was giving that example, he was saying that we're not as without Emmanuel. Obviously, we're not in the season where it is like a fountain that fills you up with more that you can handle or keep, but it can still be approached as a process of filling, because there's so many years of teaching and a spirit led and taught exposition of so much of what God has done and was doing and is doing and will do. I mean, the thing that we were encouraged to look into that worship night was my dad's survey of the scriptures, which I've been meaning to myself download so I can start to listen through them again. It's funny because several months ago I actually did start to listen through them, but I didn't keep up with it by the time I got close to Numbers or something. But yeah, that'll be an interesting thing to look through again. I know we were encouraged to do so with another person, so maybe that's a subject of conversation we can start to encourage between us, not to be designated for this time per se, but anyways, I would again encourage you guys to look at those again, because I plan to, and that'll be a good thing to kind of explore together. We don't have to listen to it at the same time, but anyway. You guys want to start reading? Where are y'all's books? I think we're on chapter 31. Letter 31. This one is entitled The Gifts of God Not to be Rejected on Account of the Channel that Brings Them. I am glad you find in the person of whom you speak the qualities you were in search of. God puts what he pleases where he pleases. Naaman could not be healed by all the waters of Syria, but must apply to those of Palestine. What does it matter from what quarter our light and help come? The source is the important point, not the conduit. That is the best channel which most exercises our faith, puts to shame our human wisdom, makes us simple and humble, and undeceives us in respect to our own power. Receive then whatever he bestows, in dependence upon the Spirit that bloweth where it listeth. We know not whence it cometh, or whither it goeth. But we need not seek to know the secrets of God. Let us only be obedient to what he reveals. Too much reasoning is a great distraction. Those who reason, the end devout wise, quench the inward spirit as the wind extinguishes a candle. After being with them for a while, we perceive our hearts dry and our mind off its center. Shun intercourse with such men. They are full of danger to you. There are some who appear recollected, but whose appearance deceives us. It is easy to mistake a certain warmth of the imagination for recollection. Such persons are eager in the pursuit of some outward good to which they are attached. They are distracted by this anxious desire. They are perpetually occupied in discussions and reasonings, but know nothing of that inward peace and silence that listens to God. They are more dangerous than others because their distraction is more disguised. Search their depths, and you will find them restless, fault-finding, eager, constantly occupied without, harsh and crude in all their desires, sensitive, full of their own thoughts, and impatient of the slightest contradiction. In a word, spiritual busybodies, annoyed at everything, and almost always annoying.
I think I've read that before.
Yeah, we might have read that one.
No, I think Emmanuel sent that out at some point.
Oh, maybe. I don't know.
Definitely read that one.
Give me some thoughts. This is kind of what's the word I'm looking for here? I see this as an insight into, firstly, the sovereignty of God and man's attempt to reason, which comes as a result of his not coming to terms with that sovereignty, because he always wants to understand why things have to be the way they are. Mm-hmm. And then that kind of ends in a warning of those kind of people.
I think that's a pretty large separation between, a sun, like a sun way of living and a worldly way of living, because almost in the sense of relying on all your knowledge and stuff from the world and those sources, you're kind of a son of the earth. But, a son of God is supposed to, the source for a true son is supposed to be from that higher wisdom which comes from on high.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's such a that's pretty distinguishable separation in a way of thinking and in a way of kind of living your life when it comes to where you seek wisdom or think what truth is.
Mm.
I mean, these are all pretty broad things to say. Like, there's a lot more detail in that, but at its core, it's just two completely separate ways of thinking. One from man's and one from the Lord's. Yeah, I think there's kind of a middle ground to that as well, where you have people who don't, well, really care about either and just kind of live their own life. But, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
People are just yelling.
No.
How do you think you would test the source? Like, if you were to come to someone who does claim to speak on God's behalf or something like that, and just use an example, how do you think the source will be known? Like, if it is from the true source, or if it's not, because it's the source that matters. So I mean, I just feel like you can be probably pretty easily caught up in the conduit, like it's saying.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess to look beyond that is to look at the source. So how do you determine that source, right?
Mm-hmm. As with many things that have to do with the Spirit, there's no method, I would say, that you become practiced with and learn to apply with your mind, as much as it is something that you develop in a spiritual awareness of. And just as the Spirit teaches you in life and in relationships, I think the Spirit can also be that that source of insight into the lives of others, and a kind of probe into other people's lives as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are very basic evidences that for the most part depend on the circumstance and the person, but which in pretty much every case come from a kind of wisdom of life. Those evidences are, in other words, the fruit of the way that they live, just as Jesus would say, I think, talking about a very similar subject, actually. He said, "You will know wisdom by her children," or by her fruits. And what is carried as an appearance is, in such people, often a contrast with the way that their lives are actually lived, and the results of that kind of life that they live, carried by the Spirit in which they operate, and the wisdom by which they make decisions. I mean, he was kind of giving an example of that here in the last paragraph when he was talking about those who appear recollected, but whose appearance deceives us, because their appearance is it is a deception, because it covers their true nature, their true selves. And he basically lists the fruits of such people. Eager in the pursuit of some outward good. You can see that their motivation is askew. It's not in line with the way that they seem to carry themselves. They're actually ambitious for appearing they're ambitious to appear a certain way, to be considered by other people in a certain light. They are distracted by this anxious desire. So it is a kind of anxiety. It's I mean, it reminds me a little bit of what we were talking about in or what I was trying to talk about in my writing class, with self getting in the way of expression, because you are most concerned about the way that you're coming across to other people. And behavior is something you can you learn to observe in anyone, and the behavior of these people Fenelon are mentioning is one that often finds itself engaged in discussions and reasonings that in their engagement in which shows that there's a lack of inward peace and silence and settlement in themselves and before God. So there's a lot that you come to realize about a person by just spending time with them and examining their lives. It's very practical stuff. It's not like you have a formula that you're able to apply to a person and then within 10 minutes have a
clear answer.
Yeah, a clear and detailed array of their lives and everything that is involved in them. But interestingly, the Spirit is able to bring that miraculous clarity. I mean, I can think of many many instances that were related by Emmanuel of there being a time in his life where he was able to just to understand a person and know what kind of life that they have or have had up to that point by just looking at them sometimes, or just spending a few minutes with them. It's interesting. But that doesn't really come from any ability that we have been able or could be able to develop. It's something of that nature is of the Spirit. There's no method there per se. What else do you guys think?
I think it's all part of letting go in our lives, because it's at that point it's not up to us, or it's not up to our own capacities to be able to do things like that. And
Do what? Do things
to
like
be
what?
able to decipher things like that, or because being led by the Spirit is a choice to adhere to something. It's not a choice to use some superpower. It's a choice to be led by something, because it's not us that's actually really doing anything. It's the action of submitting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, understanding people is a skill, just like any other. It's actually a kind of intelligence. We've talked about the 4 intelligences before. It's that second one, emotional intelligence. And I think it has much to do with relational intelligence as well, but understanding the motives of other people and what was the phrase that Emmanuel used to say, is like what makes them tick or something. that's probably a better way to put that, but what grabs certain people's attention and what tends to lose their interest. What?
Motivate them too.
That's what I said. Yeah, that was the first thing I said. But just those basics of understanding emotional intelligence. If you want to know like the real terminology behind it, it actually is split into to 2 different kinds of intelligences. The first is intrapersonal intelligence, which has to do with yourself. So understanding your emotions, that's its own intelligence. It's its completely own intelligence. And then there's interpersonal intelligence, which has to do with understanding others. And there's a lot to learn there that really can only be learned through experience. I mean, feel like some of life's greatest skills are not a thing that you read in a book or that you watch a YouTube channel about. It's something that you become accustomed to by direct engagement. And I would say the purely intellectual approach to a subject would be within that IQ range, that first and I would say lesser kind of intelligence. All other intelligence, like the emotional that we just discussed, relational, and obviously spiritual, are things that you learn by doing. But even if emotional intelligence is to be considered lesser on that hierarchy of intelligences, it's still an important one to develop. It's still good to understand yourself. And in fact, we are practicing a kind of emotional intrapersonal intelligence when we learn about death to self. I was talking about this with Isaac a little bit ago. When you have that revelation of the need to die to self, you start to think about your motives. You start to think about the way that you think. Mm-hmm. You start to think about what draws you and what repels you more and more. And that's necessary if you're going to learn to die to yourself. Yeah, there's that need for that fancy word of thinking about how you think, metacognition. And in fact, that itself is kind of the first lesson or the precedent of interpersonal intelligence, because once you've learned things about yourself, you're able to better understand other people. Because although everybody has their differences, everyone has their fundamental commonalities as human beings, as people all made in the image of God. We have similar ways of processing things, of learning things. So it's really interesting to see how those intelligences build upon one another and work together. They're not all mutually exclusive. They're not all distinct. Anyways. Is there anything else about this letter? What do you think, Isaac?
Something that me and John talked about briefly. He was just talking about something that reminded me of the title here, which is "Do not judge the vessel," which is just in relation to I think a lot of circumstances and people in his life that outwardly did not seem to be good influences or beneficial, but the Lord actually did a lot through it. And you're not disregarding the vessel just because it doesn't outwardly appeal to you or seem like a good thing. And that could be in circumstances or in people.
Yeah. Interestingly, he didn't seem to talk much about the channel. I mean, that's like the first part of what he says, but then the rest of it has more to do with being wary of those who are a little more deceptive in the way that they carry themselves and engage in more meaningful discussion about life. So that's an interesting point to consider more, because I was thinking that was what he was going to discuss more about. Less of a wariness of those who do carry themselves deceptively, and more of a wariness towards ourselves to not too quickly judge the channel or the vessel that the Lord may be using or working through. It's interesting. Alright, why don't we move to the next letter, 32. Poverty and spoliation, the way of Christ. Everything contributes to prove you. But God, who loves you, will not suffer your temptations to exceed your strength. He will make use of the trial for your advancement. But we must not look inwards with curiosity to behold our progress, our strength, or the hand of God, which is not the less efficient because it is invisible. Its principal operations are conducted in secrecy. For we should never die to self if he always visibly stretched out his hand to save us. God would then sanctify us in light, life, and the possession of every spiritual grace, but not upon the cross, in darkness, privation, nakedness, and death. The directions of Christ are not, if anyone will come after me. Oh, what he means is, the directions of Christ are not, if anyone will come after me, let him enjoy himself, let him be gorgeously apparelled, let him be intoxicated with delight, as was Peter on the Mount. Let him be glad in his perfection in me and in himself. Let him behold himself and be assured that he is perfect. On the contrary, his words are, if anyone will come after me, I will show him the road he must take. Let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. In a path beside precipices, where he will see nothing but death on every hand. St. Paul declares that we desire to be clothed upon, and that it is necessary, on the contrary, to be stripped to very nakedness, that we may then put on Christ. Suffer him, then, to despoil self-love of every adornment, even to the inmost covering under which it lurks, that you may receive the robe whitened by the blood of the Lamb, having no other purity than his. O happy soul, that no longer possesses anything of its own, not even anything borrowed, and that abandoned itself to the well-beloved, being jealous of every beauty but his. O spouse, how beautiful art thou, when thou hast no longer anything of thy own, I guess he means. Thou shalt be altogether the delight of the bridegroom, when he shall be all thy comeliness. Then he will love thee without measure, because it will be himself that he loves in thee. Hear these things and believe them. This pure truth shall be bitter in your mouth and belly, but it shall feed your heart upon that death which is the only true life. Give faith to this, and listen not to self. It is the grand seducer, more powerful than the serpent that deceived our mother. Happy the soul that hearkens in all simplicity to the voice that forbids its hearing of the compassionating self. This is an interesting one. What do y'all think? He's pretty sharp about what it really means to follow Christ. Now, it doesn't mean it being a matter of walking in this humanistic ideal of the light of life and self-contentment and victory and success and blessing as a result of our submitting our lives to God's way. Would it being a matter of death on every side? But it doesn't end there. He talks about how this suffering makes way for the greatest victory, the greatest achievement and success that is not one that we can claim for our own. The being stripped bare to our very nakedness is what makes way for what is essentially the clothing of heaven, the adornment of heaven. And we're adorned not to appreciate our own beauty, but we're adorned with something that brings out the beauty that had been deposited within us. That is not an expression of self, but an expression of something beyond self, something that is that reflects the likeness of God, of the Father, and that's a real sign of the fulfillment of sonship in us. When that likeness is no longer marred by self, by the flesh, by anything that is of the world. But the only way for that to ever be possible is when we are rid of every trace of it. So that's why death is always necessary.
The death is a death to self. That's why there's death on every side. Because we're always fighting against ourself, taking up that cross.
For there to be death on every side only means that every side of us that is facing to whatever side is requiring death. So death is only present when death is needed in this context. And that's what we can trust the Lord to bring, is when our hearts are willing. Rather than fear it or shirk away from it, we submit to it, and we choose humility, which makes it possible, which which exposes the flesh, you might say, to that surgeon's knife to cut out whatever is needed to be removed. It's an interesting thing to learn to detect spiritually when there's death approaching. I don't know how to put this into a particular instance, but death not in an evil sense, because this is beyond good and evil. It's death as a part of the way the Lord sanctifies us and works in us. There is a scent of death that I think we can learn to detect, and that means there's something that needs to die, that needs to be finished, that we need to be rid of, or that maybe that needs to be transformed.
When he talks about how God who loves you will not suffer your temptation to exceed your strength, does that mean I don't think it means.
Where is this? I'm sorry.
It's the first, what he opens up with. I'm just thinking about that thought.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that oftentimes temptations will exceed our strength.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? I think that's part of the reason why I guess maybe he's talking about when we find our strength not in ourselves. That's probably what he's referring to there.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's important to draw a contrast between what strength he's talking about.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, tell me more. What do you think?
Because I think that's, I don't know, for me at least, I feel like I've also thought in that way where, God is good and he might let me bend, but he won't let me break, is the really popular saying, I guess. But I think oftentimes it is his intention to break us in a way, to be able to prove or to bring new life where the broken pieces are. And I think that's interesting paired with what he says afterward too, because he's talking about how you shouldn't even be curious to behold your progress in that. I think again it's talking about his sovereignty again, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being or learning what it means to be trusting in his sovereignty in that process.
Yeah, it's obvious enough that God knows what we can and can't handle. And it's not even necessarily a matter of, in God's mind, him thinking, well, I'm only going to allow this to happen because I know that Noah can handle it, or I know that Benji can handle it. Because there are, like you said, most certainly times in which God allows certain things to transpire that do bring a sense of brokenness to us, of being rendered completely unable according to our own strength. And so when Finland says everything contributes to prove you, but God who loves you will not suffer your temptations to exceed your strength, it's an interesting statement, because I think when God does intend for there to be a overcoming of whether it be temptation or any kind of hardship, then he will not allow there to be any temptation or hardship that we are literally unable to overcome, because that our ability to overcome it boils down to two things: God's sovereignty and our choice. And so, in the sense that God does give us that choice, yes, we do have the strength to choose one way and not another. I mean, that's what the daily process of death to self is. That's a choice. It's a pattern we learn to live out. I was actually just texting my poetry group about this today because Nicole asked a related question. I was saying, I mean, that's what it means to be a living sacrifice. It's not someone who has died to self once and for all. It's someone who daily dies to self, daily bears that cross. And that's something that we have been given the strength to do. That is a temptation that does not exceed our strength. That's a hardship that we can overcome. But we have the choice not to as well. But God is also patient with us, and obviously just as daily as our death to self is, and the choices we make unto that end, so also is our mistakes and our falling short. And that's kind of what he was speaking on there. He says he will make use of the trial for your advancement, but we must not look inwards with curiosity to behold our progress, our strength, or the hand of God, which is not the less efficient because it is invisible. And that's one of the sharper themes in this book, is that what Fenelon addresses as that need in us to know if we're in a good place or not, if we're heading to a good place at least. We always are looking for that affirmation, but that desire, that inclination that we have to know of our state, whether or not it's something that we can be content with, is just another obstacle.
What stage should we be in? Why is it not a good thing to try to make sure you're on, or even be concerned about your current standing of direction?
I like to think of it as walking on a tightrope. What's the one thing you should not do when you're doing that?
Look down.
Yeah, you want to see where you're at. And if you do that, you lose balance. And then the whole thing is in jeopardy.
I think it's not a bad desire to want to obviously be tested and approved, making sure that you are living in a way that honors God.
Mm-hmm.
But like what was I gonna say? I had the thought.
It doesn't mean that affirmation doesn't come, and it doesn't mean that encouragement doesn't come, whether it be from other people or even God Himself.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not actively pursuing that.
That's not the focus.
That's not what keeps. That shouldn't be what keeps you going.
Mm-hmm.
Because if that becomes something you search after in order to continue, then you will very quickly become disappointed, and that tends to be the source of unhappiness, generally speaking, is when you have an expectation and it's not met.
Yeah.
And so your priorities and your expectations they shouldn't stoop as low as needing affirmation for your current state spiritually.
And I think when the Lord has told you in part who you are, that should be enough to, like you're saying, keep your gaze fixed upon what's ahead, not like below.
Yeah.
In the tightrope situation, like that's such a. I remember talking to you about it a while ago. How that's such a beginning stage to finally be able to not have to be validated.
Yeah.
Because once you've given yourself to a certain to this life of walking with God and being perfected by Him, that means that you're always in that relationship. You're still in that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that there should be an excuse to, like you're saying, just not think about if you're in the right place or not, but just change of focus there.
Just think of an example of someone making you dinner, and you eat it and you tell the person, I really enjoyed that. I really did. Which person out of the two I'll give you do you think really trusts your enjoyment? Is it the person that says thank you and then appreciates your appreciation, you enjoy the rest of that evening together? Or is it the person that throughout the rest of the evening continues to ask you, did you enjoy that? I was like, yeah, I did. And then you ask again, are you sure there wasn't like anything about the potatoes that you didn't like? Or did you just continue to ask you, did you really enjoy that? There's obviously an unsettlement in that person about whether or not you're even being honest. And what that shows is maybe a fundamental lack of trust between the two of you to begin with.
That's true.
And so the person that cooked dinner, the second one, needs affirmation continually because really the only reason could be that he thinks you're being dishonest. He doesn't think you're being fully transparent with him. But the trust of the first person in you makes it to where they only needed to hear you once. You cleared your plate, so that's enough for them. Is that making sense?
Yeah.
I'm not saying asking the Lord questions and desiring to hear Him is a kind of imploring. It can get to that depending on where your heart is and where you're coming from, but a great measure of our trust in the Lord is how we are able to posture ourselves in quietness before Him. And I'm not talking about setting aside quiet time for Him, but even in life. There are seasons of quietness before the Lord. And that's when our strength and our commitment and trust is really tested. Because we're not hearing, you don't hear anything. But it doesn't mean the Lord isn't there.
Yeah, it's less about maybe the action, like you're saying, asking questions, but more like how you're asking questions or why. What's the motive that we're talking about?
Yeah, a son that continues to ask his father if he's a son or not is probably
Oh,
not going to be as effective.
That would be kind of strange, yeah.
Is one who lives as if he is a son, still asks questions about life, but the question isn't if you're a son or not.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, as a father, I'd find that almost like offensive.
Mm-hmm.
Son kept on asking me
Mm-hmm.
that.
She's got a belly.
Should we read the next one? You guys have anything more to add? All right. This is a short one, letter 33. The will of God, our only treasure. I desire that you may have that absolute simplicity of abandonment that never measures its own extent, nor accepts anything in the present life, no matter how dear to our self-love. All illusions come not from such an abandonment as this, but from one attended by secret reservations. Be as lowly and simple in the midst of the most exacting society as in your own closet. Do nothing from the reasonings of wisdom nor from natural pleasure, but all from submission to the spirit of life and death, death to self, and life in God. Let there be no enthusiasm, no search after certainty within, no looking forwards to better things, for better things, as if the present, bitter as it is, were not sufficient to those whose sole treasure is the will of God, and as if you would indemnify self-love for the sadness of the present by the prospects of the future. We deserve to meet with disappointment when we seek such vain consolation. Let us receive everything in lowliness of spirit, seeking nothing from curiosity, and withholding nothing from a disguised selfishness. Let God work, and think only of dying to the present moment without reservation, as though it were the whole of eternity.
It seems like all three of these chapters have a lot to do with the trust in the Father, and just really a detachment from things that are not rooted in truth or in God's way, because those things obviously will crumble. Even if they seem to work out in some ways and some understandings of life, they're not. They're all built upon the sand. And it's just a matter of building upon the rock, and that's a lot harder to do, but even in different illustrations, it's having that trust that the Lord is by your side. And I mean, even we're talking about quiet seasons where the Lord doesn't really seem like He's as present. There's still even a trust and a testing there, where it's that we're operating under we definitely can't operate under an assumption that God is there, but because I think there's definitely a difference between assuming and trusting, because we know if we're living with a certain heart posture and desire that we can trust in the Lord. But yeah, just speaking very vaguely, not anything specifically of this chapter even, just seems like the past three we read seem to have a lot to do with that reliance and trust in the Father and not kind of examples of being of the world but not, I mean, being in the world but not of the world.
Yeah, so much of Finland's encouragement shows a soul that is like so narrowed. I think he even illustrated it like this once, but so narrowed to a place where it can't go anywhere else. There's like only one option. There's it's as if to say that there is only one way to die to self. There aren't many ways. There aren't options. It's not a matter of you can die to self this way because it's a little less it's a little less painful or a little less tormenting. But like when you get to a place where death to self is the option, there's only one way to do it. You guys kind of see what I'm saying?
It's the only other option. It's not like
Death to self.
That situation that you're talking about.
Yeah, death to self isn't, out of all options aside from it, the only option, because there are other options. But when death to self is chosen, then you've taken a very, very narrow course. It's probably, it would seem that even if there was any confusion about which course would be the course of death to self, all you would have to do is see which one was the narrowest. And that's probably death to self. There's no, it's not an option that you should or have the flexibility to turn back on, because in doing so you fail that course, even if other courses do allow that flexibility. It's just when he says, let there be no enthusiasm, no search after certainty within, no looking forwards for better things, as if the present, bitter as it was, were not sufficient to those whose sole treasure is the will of God. We deserve to meet with disappointment when we seek such vain consolation. Let us receive everything in lowliness of spirit, seeking nothing from curiosity, and withholding nothing from a disguised selfishness. There's no room for any trace of self. That's what makes it so narrow. But perhaps really what makes it narrow is that because we tend to live life through the lens of self, when there is no self allowed when walking on that path, it seems as if we enter into nothingness, like actual nothingness. That's why I see so many parallels between this and learning to let go in life in the same way that you would in doing, not doing, or wu wei, like we've talked about a little bit. I don't know if the connection between the two has been highlighted by anyone per se, but I think there's a very, very important and interesting connection between the two, because they're both ways of living life, and both require letting go, particularly of self. But one explains more of that act of letting go, that being death to self, and the other explains the way you're able to live once you have let go, which would be that doing not doing. What else do you guys think?
It's just hard to think of, like, in life, how to do that.
How? Like, what do you mean?
How to do but not do.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of similar to what I was saying, is that we're not operating under or by our own strength. Because obviously our brain tells us what to do and we do our limbs, and it's kind of that, but like it's different than that, obviously. It's that, again, that reliance on the Lord to lead us and to, like, He's our source.
You have any thoughts, Isaac?
I don't think so.
Noah's got something.
It's actually just something I was reading today that I'm reminded of as we made our way through that letter.
Is that a book about the way?
It is, actually. Here we go. This paragraph was interesting to me. We talked about duh a little bit in a few analytic classes ago. But it doesn't really matter to explain it here if you don't remember. But he says, this is, for anyone listening, Trying Not to Try by Edward Slingerland is something I was interested in, because Edward Slingerland is the same guy who actually translated and commented on the version of the analects we're going through. He says in this paragraph, so Wu Wei and De are fundamentally linked to heaven. Wu Wei works because to be Wu Wei means that you are following the heavenly way, and anyone following the way gains the power of De, which essentially is like you might even call it the light that is produced by your way of living as a result of walking in the way. It's a light visible to others, and it even draws others.
Interesting.
This connection has important implications for understanding the kind of spontaneity that the early Chinese valued so highly. Spontaneity in the West, this is the important part. Spontaneity in the West is typically associated with individuality, people just doing whatever they want. Wu Wei, on the other hand, means becoming part of something larger, the cosmic order represented by the way. Sages from Confucius at age 70 to the Taoists describe Wu Wei as a state of fitting with the universe. Obviously, a modern secular thinker like Edward Slingerland is going to use terms like cosmic order and universe when really we understand the true way to put that is God's order and creation. Does that make sense? Similarly, Da is powerful because heaven has made humans, animals, and even the natural world in a way that they respond instantly and unquestioningly to virtue. The Da-bearing sage can attract people, calm wild animals, and ensure good harvests in inclement weather. He was referring to a lot of, I think, actually ancient Chinese examples of and even fables of that Da in use in an individual. So anyways, the connection he made between Wu Wei and walking out a heavenly way, and how that is distinguished from the Western interpretation of what it means to be in the flow and be spontaneous, which has more to do with you as an individual. was very interesting, because the closest parallel I was able to give when I tried to explain Wu Wei is like being in the flow, and that's true from an individual point of view, but it's not separate, as Slingerland is pointing out, in early Chinese thought, from being a part of some greater flow, you might say, or purpose that is far, far beyond your own life. So you're not just becoming the best person you can be. It's about joining. It's about tapping into something that has to do with everything that is. It has to do with God's order. It has to do with all of it has to do with all of creation. And to put it into that quote unquote cosmic perspective is interesting, because really you can only begin to comprehend that, much less participate in it, once you have died to the self, so to speak, once you have let go of those narrow ways of viewing the world, which always will be so when they are seen through self, through the self-oriented life. Really interesting stuff. That was my attempt to kind of draw that connection between death to self and Wu Wei. I think there's a lot more to explore there, but I guess y'all don't have anything else, huh? I don't want to be getting through the chapters too fast, or the letters too fast. We've already read 3 of them. Y'all don't seem to be all that conversational tonight. That's alright. That's been a while, I guess. Guess we can wrap it up. Unless there's anything else y'all wanted to share. Benji, you want to pray for us?
Lord, we thank you for, Lord, being a good father to us, Lord, for never failing, Lord, to accomplish, Lord, your purposes through whatever way, Lord, you desire. Lord, I pray for each one here, Lord, that we would be able to redirect, Lord, by your guidance, our lives, Lord, to be, Lord, aligned with your purposes, and Lord, to allow, Lord, your Spirit to take position, Lord, in our lives. Lord, that we would be able to be placed by you, Lord, so that we, Lord, fall into line with your way, Lord. That we would begin to redirect, Lord, each thing in each arena, Lord, of our lives to your purposes, Lord, to your wisdom. And I pray, Lord, that you would continue to teach us, Lord. Allow us to have that teachable spirit, Lord, which you can work with and can, Lord, produce fruit by. Thank you, Lord, for, Lord, each way that you do that, Lord. And Lord, we pray that our hearts and minds would be settled, Lord, in a way as to provide, Lord, a foundation in which you can, Lord, continue to use us, Lord, to build your house. pray that you would, Lord, answer the questions of each heart, Lord, the questions that which are sincere, Lord, and of a pure desire, pure heart. Lord, that you would allow us to wrestle and allow us to stumble, Lord, in the ordained path that you set. Lord, but I pray that we wouldn't keep that to ourselves, Lord, but allow it to be fruited out in our relationships, Lord, that we would be those who are open and honest, Lord, with one another and with you. Lord, even though you know our hearts already, Lord, I thank you for this time, and I pray that you would, Lord, help us to operate by your strength, Lord, and to continue to meditate upon your truth, Lord, each day. Amen.
Amen.